Tonight's guest, Katherine Ann Jones, she has an MA in depth psychology. She's played major roles both on and off Broadway. She's authored 11 plays. She's written movies, television programs, and books, 8 of them at last count. And she's an award winner as an author. She's a Fulbright scholar in India, and she's a professor. That's not enough. She can help you write your own bestseller, right? Via her own website, wayofstory.com. Tonight, she's here to talk about her latest book, East and West Stories of India. So we are so pleased to welcome back to Chaucer's Katherine Ann Jones. All right, I'm going to ask you a couple questions. First of all, have you always been a creative person? I mean, your career speaks for itself.
I think so. I started writing poetry at 7.
Mm-hmm.
At 9, I was writing little plays and casting and directing them and charging 25 cents. Mostly the parents would come.
Wow.
So it's sort of always been there. Acting was my first career. That led to playwriting. And then Hollywood invited me to write feature films. I wrote a film for Dolly Parton for Disney called Unlikely Angel. My first film was The Christmas Wife. We got 4 Emmy nominations.
She got her own Emmy nomination.
Yeah, writing.
Yeah.
And that starred Jason Robards and Julie Harris.
Yeah.
You have actor, and I got co-producer because I cast the script, the movie.
Oh, wow.
And you use actors like Jason and Julie. You could give them the telephone book, and it would work.
Yeah.
You know? So I can't take huge credit.
Yeah.
And then I wrote for a TV show called Touched by an Angel, which I'm very proud of because it gave people hope. And I think we need more books and movies like that today.
That series starring Della Reese was one of my late mother's favorite series.
Yeah.
So thank you for writing that.
Yeah. I'm starting to hear people say, "Oh, my grandmother loved that show." There.
Great.
I love it when someone
fan.
younger says there. It's streaming. I think 4 of my shows are streaming on Amazon now.
We'll have to IMDb you then.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So getting back to you as a child, were there like certain books and or movies that really stuck with you to put you on this path?
Well, I was a TV kid. I was born in New Orleans. We had the first television in our neighborhood. I was 5, and I was into television from then on. When I was in junior high and high school, I loved watching the old movies from the 40s and 50s.
Yeah.
And it just, I didn't know I'd end up writing for Hollywood, but I certainly lived that. Yeah. So.
It's a very different kind of writing a screenplay and novels, obviously, and you're writing books. And if you talk a little bit about your evolution as a writer from...
Well, as you say, dramatic writing, plays, movies, it's not meant to be read, but seen and heard. And I've had a parallel career teaching graduate school, teaching writing at the New School University in New York, and at USC Graduate Film School, I taught graduate screenwriting. Thanks to Pacifica Graduate Institute, where I got my graduate degree here, after I burned out in Hollywood a little bit, I was doing too much at once. And, in graduate school, you have to write all these long papers.
Yeah.
And I developed my prose voice thanks to the graduate school.
Wow.
And afterwards, I thought I was having writer's block because I couldn't write for a time. And I realized there was a change, and I didn't write movies or plays, but I started with my first book, The Way of Story, which I think you sell
Yes, yes.
And sometimes writer's block to me means there's something that needs to change. It's the same with depression. It means a change is needed. That can be a divorce, go to a new city, change careers, whatever, or change the kind of writing you do in my case.
Interesting.
So to me, it's a little sign that you need to look deeper and figure out what is it I need to change.
So your training in Jungian psychology really opened you up then.
Oh, even more, sure.
Did you, was it small transitions or did you notice it right away that?
Well, I've spent many years in India. I've made 43 flights to India over the years. And someone asked me once in an interview, what's my philosophy? I'm somewhere between Advaita Vedanta, which is the philosophy behind Hinduism, no God concept, and Jungian psychology. And I think the Jungian part brings humanity more to the focus.
Interesting.
So those are my two influences. And a lot of these stories have a acorn of truth from my own experiences. Like there's a story called Fulbright Folly. I was a Fulbright scholar studying shamanism for a year. There's a story called Tea with Mrs. Gandhi. I was a distinguished guest of India. They brought me. And Mrs. Gandhi was head of India then, and she invited me for tea. And I mentioned the only one in the room was Mrs. Gandhi, my husband, and myself, and 2 Sikh guards that were standing nearby, her bodyguards. A few months later, those guards assassinated Mrs. Gandhi.
Wow.
And so, so I use that story, not about me, but the backdrop is what happened to Mrs. Gandhi. So, in fact, I was going to mention this later, but just one interesting thing that might interest you is I wrote a short story 30 years ago that I'm going to read. I chose the shortest short story in the book to read, called Rootman is God, and it was published in London in a journal. My idea was to write a book of short stories set in India, but you know, you move on. I was writing plays, and then Hollywood. I never wrote the other stories. A publisher in Cambridge, England, read that story that was published in London 30 years ago, contacted me and said, would you consider writing a book of short stories set in India? And I thought, I always meant to do that. So 30 years later, and it was during COVID, I usually go to India every year. It's my spiritual home, but I couldn't travel, so India came to Ojai. Wow. And so I wrote 14 more stories set in India. And you know, life is magical. I find the best things in my life are uninvited and unexpected. So here's the quote I found when I, just after I finished the stories, before I was sending the manuscript off to England. It's from Albert Camus. Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. And I believe that. So I'm writing about the light and the dark side of India. Every country has its shadow. We certainly do here, and so does India. I thought if it's okay, Michael, I'd read just 2 small paragraphs from a wonderful introduction by Diane Skafta, who is with us this evening. So thank you, Diane. And here are 2 that talk about the book. The stories of India take place on multiple levels of reality, Themes from ancient mythology are woven into worldly events. Forces of destiny thwart one's desire, then open splendid new gateways. Ardent love from a past incarnation reaches across the centuries and heals the wound of the heart. Uncanny dreams warn of danger ahead. For me, following these stories was like watching a drama unfold on the stage, then looking up at a higher platform and seeing the gods enacting a play of their own. And then one other short piece, again from Diane.
Nicely written.
India's soul contains stories within stories, a million layers deep, strange and familiar, ancient and contemporary, human and divine. They beckon us to know them so that we may better know ourselves. Stories of India opens a gateway to wonders we will long remember. Diane Scofton. Thank you. It's worth reading her whole introduction, I can tell you.
I will, yeah.
Okay, this is something we don't do anymore. I remember I loved reading stories to my son when he was little, and we continued it. And when he got older, 12 and up, we would start reading Charles Dickens. Like one night I would read to my son, the next night he would read to me. It's a lost art, but it's wonderful,
Yeah.
I think, to hear stories read.
That's great.
So I'm going to be, this is the first one I told you that I wrote 30 odd years ago. Rootman's God. Incidentally, I have a short quote before each story. My publisher told me, you can't have a quote before a short story, it's not done, I've never seen it done. And I said, well, you have now. And when we did a Zoom panel from New Delhi, the book came out first there. The professor at Delhi University at the beginning of the discussion said, I want to mention I especially loved the quotes before each story. So I thought, yes, so stick to your vision. So this is from Joseph Campbell, who was actually a friend of mine in New York. Here's a quote: the two worlds, the divine and the human, are actually one. The realm of the gods is a forgotten dimension of the world we know. And here's the story. The call of countless crows, the slow swish of coconut stick brooms gracefully maneuvered by bent backs, the tinny, unhurried rattle of stainless steel buckets full of sugared tea and coffee grown in the nearby Kerala hills. Village women at the river scolding children, slapping saris against an upturned flat rock. India awakes. It is early morning in Kottayam. Who would believe the miracle that would soon come to this sleepy town? The land is brown, parched as always before the first monsoon. The open beak of the chakora, most auspicious of birds, is turned upward to the heavens. The ancient ones say that this is how one must thirst for God. However, most villagers settle for some rice paddy, lentils, green chilies, and if Lakshmi smiles, a new piece of cloth at Onam festival, when old King Mahabali fulfills his promise and descends from heaven to visit his people each year. Will the rains never come, complains Meenakshi, stretching her fat arms over her head. Look, there she is again, there, sleeping on the pavement. That new beggar girl. as if we had any food to spare. She's young, observed Pachikame, and crazy, clucks Meenakshi, dismissing her with a motion of her hand and turning her head to steer her husband's mind back to the shop. The floor swept, she begins to set out the glasses and pastries, chatting with her husband to pass the time. With her parents' dowry, she should have done better than to marry a tea shop owner, and a lazy one at that. Suddenly a bell clangs as if heralding a royal visitor. Two white bullocks with patient eyes sway, pulling a heavy cart of ripe coconuts to morning market. Rootman stirs in her sleep as the bullocks pass by, but she refuses to awaken and leave dreaming behind. Every night when she sleeps, Rootmani dreams the same dream of the lotus-dye blue-colored one, Gopalakrishna, the one who dances with the gopis. The gopis, as of course everyone knows, are great rishis reborn as cow maidens to be devotees of Lord Krishna. Why should Rootmani wait from such a divine dance to the life of a street beggar? Pachikaimal turns his head to watch the sleeping girl with close cropped hair and wonders aloud, what is her name? Which village is she from? Is she a widow? How young she is. Meenakshi shatters his musing. Mother, enough. Come along now, get the glasses so we can open shop. Go to now, we must work. Are all men lazy? Orange, orange, papaya, mango, orange, orange, hawk the street vendors. Rootmani opens her eyes, causing her beautiful blue-colored lord to vanish. Dust flies from the scurry of thonged feet and fills her eyes, which she wipes with the edge of a faded, torn sari. She stretches and rubs her taut stomach, trying to remember when she fed it last. Yesterday? The day before? Time has ceased to be a reality. She remembers walking away from her village, a distance of 5 or 6 days perhaps. How long she has lived on the streets now she no longer remembers, nor does she recollect the day her husband died and her in-laws threw her out. One mouth too many to feed, they reasoned. She was then childishly naive, vulnerable to the drunken, frustrated males who harassed and used her. Now in her mid-20s, she has left that village for good and made her way to this larger town. Rising unsteadily to her bare feet, Rootmani steps out onto the dusty road and is almost struck by a bicycle which rings and swerves just in time to avoid hitting her, the rider scolding her inattention. Almost deaf since birth, she cannot hear the bell or his scolding. Rootmani misses her dream. Nearby, on a back street, lives Aziz. With memory as blank as his unseeing eyes, the old Muslim spends his days begging, plucking the sleeves of indifferent passers-by with his grimy, gnarled fingers. Old, blind, and gaunt, Aziz has regressed into infancy, babbling incoherently. Pachikaimal says Aziz has been on the back streets of Kottayam for the past 25 years, a red tin bowl his only possession. No one remembers where he came from or if he had any family. How it happened or what unspoken understanding passed between them, nobody knows. One day the old beggar was alone and uncared for. The next, there she was beside him on his patch of pavement. There they were, Rootmani, the crazy Hindu village girl in a soiled and tattered sari, and Aziz, a blind and wrinkled old Muslim, suddenly inseparable. As dawn breaks over their corner of the world, Rootman now wakes with purpose and wanders down to the local tea shop. A handful of coins jingles in her palm, and Meenakshi notes she always pays without complaint for tea and bread. Carefully balancing the hot glass of tea and the slices of bread, Rootman ignores the jeering comments of the crowd. With what clearly is devotion, she lifts the streaming glass of tea to the old man's lips and smiles. She is now the mother to the child he has become. She washes away the grime from his face and sees that he never goes hungry, never feeding herself until he has been fed. The townspeople call her mad to sacrifice what little she has. A crow swoops down and snatches a piece of bread from Asis's hand just as he is about to eat it. Unable to see that it has disappeared, poor Asis bites his finger, causing onlookers to laugh. Mirth soon turns to silence as the beggar girl places the hurt finger against her forehead and tenderly draws the old man to her breast. Another day, Meenakshi, interpreting Rootman's compassion as suggestive embraces, calls out, "Crazy, crazy girl, why do you give yourself to an old beard that cannot even see?" Weeks pass into months as the odd couple provides morbid amusement for the dull town. The beady smoking men jeer, while the young boys, sometimes from boredom, throw stones. Mostly, Rootman ignores them or laughs back, but occasionally she breaks down and cries into the old man's lap. Then Asis comforts her as a father. At night they sleep amidst beady cigarette stubs and discarded trash, curled up on the darkened back street like contented kittens. Sometimes Rootman is lured into strange bedrooms, returning with a couple of rupees in payment. Then, disapproving, the old man refuses to speak to her. Often he is heard to wail, "What will she do after I am gone? May Allah protect her." Both accept that only death will part them now. In time, they learn to ignore the rude stares and lewd taunts and gestures, not because he is blind or she is deaf, nor because he is old or she is young, or he a Muslim and she a Hindu, but because in the filth and stench of an Indian backstreet, they have transformed dark poverty into light. Asis is mostly now a contented man, stroking his stubby white beard and listening for hours to the young girl's chatter. Her movements, once hesitant, are sure and quick and full of purpose. Her face shines like a Maharaja's jewel. The village women who pass now avert their eyes, blinded by such brightness. Rootman has no need of dreams now. She smells the scent of white jasmine. Even Meenakshi leaves her alone for the most part, content to count her money and fight with Pachikaimo. Still, sometimes angry with her lazy husband, Meenakshi cruelly taunts the beggar girl. "Can't you see he's nothing but rotting flesh?" Rootman looks up, smiles, and says, "I do not know what you mean, Mother. He is my Gopala Krishna, my Lord. He is my blue-colored one."
Wonderful.
So,
God.
are we open for questions?
Yeah.
Or can we do?
Please, if anybody has any questions or comments,
Or sharing or whatever. Has anyone ever been to India here? Oh, good. Well, this is a way to go without jet lag. Yeah. Anything you'd like to know, or?
How long did it take you to write the book, put
The-
it together?
Well, I could say 30 years,
30 years.
yes. But I wrote the one 30 years ago, and the others, it came rather quickly. It feels like it came through me. 3 months, maybe. Yeah, the other 14, yeah. Was that, so.
It was so fresh, still in your
Yeah,
memory.
yeah, yeah, yes.
Do you keep in touch with, I'm sure you keep, do you keep in touch with people back there that you wrote about? Like the little girl who was begging, or just the other people?
There weren't, this story is pure fiction.
Oh, the whole, okay, I was
Yeah.
curious if there was
Yeah,
inspiration.
no, I've been to Kottayam, it's southernmost state in India, Kerala, which is the state I know best. But, no, I made up that whole thing.
Wow.
That one's pure fiction. Many of the ones do have, I'll give you one short anecdote. When I was brought over to India as distinguished guest, they call it, they took me to Jaipur, and I've been a psychic reader for 48 years. I do that on the phone or in person, and I do astrology. So I heard of a well-known astrologer in Jaipur. So I asked to be taken there, and he looked at my chart and he said, "You were a temple dancer in South India in a past life," because astrologers there don't stop with this life.
Like Udisi? Temple dancer? Like Udisi? Temple?
Risi, yeah, devoted to Krishna, you know, in the temples. So I went a month later, I was back in New York where I lived then. I went to a New Year's Day party, a cocktail party. A woman I had never seen walked across the room to me, did not introduce herself. She walked across the room. She had black hair and piercing green eyes. She looked at me and said, "You were a temple dancer in India in a past life."
Wow.
So that was the acorn that became the story in Tea with Mrs. Gandhi, and the sequel story called My Life as a Devadasi. Though it used to be the practice in India that a family would give an 8-year-old daughter to the temple, and they would be raised by the priests in the arts of dancing and music. And part of their dharma, or what they were to do later, was to become a consort to the princes or the maharaja, you know, their mistresses, so to speak. So I wrote a reincarnation story from the germ of
Thank you.
being told. I don't know if it was my story back then, but
Ah,
it was great fun writing. Any other questions or comments?
Can I have one more? Sorry.
Sure.
yeah.
You knew Joseph Campbell?
I did, yeah,
Wow.
yeah. I knew him as a friend before I read him.
That's amazing.
And I'll say, my memoir is Dancing, Buddha and the Dancing Girl, A Creative Life. And I talk about Campbell there. One thing he had that I've only seen twice in my life and career. Even when I knew him toward the end of his life, he had an adolescent enthusiasm for mythology. You know, as though he were 18 and just discovered it. He never lost that. And that's very rare, I think. And, you know, Bill Moyers did that series of interviews, The Power of Myth. And that was just 6 months before Joe died. So you can see during those, I think, 10 hours, that he never lost that love of mythology. I'm sorry he's not with us. I think he would have liked the book. Yeah. Yeah.
We have time for one more question. Would anybody like to share thoughts?
Yes.
I was born in Pune, India,
Wow.
and I'm writing a memoir about my parents' life there. We were interned by the British for a long time.
Wow.
And I was just wondering, since I'm going back to the past and not dealing with the present, except indirectly possibly, there's enough of a story there to do the whole book. But I'm just wondering, is that one of your specialties, is memoir?
I've
Or-
written 2 memoirs.
That's what I
One
thought.
true fable, stories from childhood,
Uh-huh.
and the other Buddha and the Dancing Girl.
Okay, is that here, that book?
Those aren't, but
Oh, no.
maybe we can get
We
them.
have one copy of Buddha and the Dancing
Oh, you
Girl.
do?
Yeah.
back
Oh,
right
there's
there.
that must be for you. India's a
I'll
section,
go take a look at it. Yeah.
and India
Yeah.
is a section of the
Yeah,
book.
yeah.
Yeah.
What parts do you go to regularly?
Mostly Kerala, it's the southern
Kerala.
tip.
Mhm.
But I've taught in Delhi,
Mhm.
and I do spend time in Delhi, but mostly Kerala.
Mhm.
That's my home, my real,
Yeah,
in
yeah.
the deepest
Yeah,
sense, my
yeah, no, I
home.
understand, yeah.
Well,
I,
I wish you luck with that.
Thank you, yeah, well, the interesting twist of the story is that I was going to write it with my father, and he had just sent me a 2-page typed synopsis that my mother typed up, and I'm German, and he was in Germany, I was here in California, and just when he had finished doing that and she sent it to me, he had a sudden cerebral hemorrhage and was paralyzed from then on.
Wow.
And we took care of him at home for 7.5 years, but he could never even answer a single question anymore. He couldn't speak. And so it made it even more pressing for me to get it done, because now
Yes.
there's no one to tell the story. And it's such an interesting story.
No, I think you're called to do it.
Yeah.
I'll
yeah.
tell you one benefit from writing a memoir that I didn't anticipate. After I finished writing the main one, Buddha and the Dancing Girl, I felt I had written the past away. I had gotten it
Yeah.
off my back.
Yeah.
And it sort of left this wonderful space for tomorrow.
I can relate to that already. I can see
Good.
that happening.
So
Mhm.
go forward with
Yeah,
that.
thank you. Okay,
Yeah.
well,
You had
Okay.
my last question, you had mentioned about Buddha and the Dancing Girl just now, about getting it off your back. Would East and West Stories of India be sharing feeling, and I'm not sure what I'm trying to get at, but as far as your own experience, all of your experiences in India, it's fiction. However, were you able to share all of your feelings and experiences through these stories?
Well, my more personal memories are in Buddha and the Dancing Girl, especially the India section. But here I'm writing about the light and the dark side. I'll do another quick anecdote. I wrote one called Murder in Assam. And this one was pure fiction. I've never been to Assam. I made up the whole thing, I thought. A friend of mine sent the story to a friend of his without mentioning it to me in Bangalore. She wrote back that what I had written had actually happened.
Wow.
Woo-hoo. And her friend had it's about the tea plantations in Assam.
Okay.
Since the 1800s, most black tea that we use in England, Europe, and America is from Assam.
Mhm.
And they have these young girls who handpick the tea leaves. And I wrote about how a British overseer runs it, manages it, and uses the girls for his pleasure. That leads to a murder. And she said a friend of hers had a plantation next to another plantation, and there was an overlord there who was British, and he would name the girls the days of the week: Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. And if your name is Wednesday, that's your day to service the master.
Wow.
That's going on, and I mean today that's going on,
Yeah.
not way back.
Mhm.
So I kept thinking of Plato's oversoul idea that all of knowledge and history is up there, and sometimes you can tap into it. And, you know, like scientific discoveries may
Yeah.
happen at the same time, different parts of the world. Anyway, I've had that happen in my writing, other things, and I find it fascinating.
Yeah.
You can consciously make up something, but it's already
There.
existing. So
Well,
there
we're,
are more things in heaven and earth, right?
well through East and West Stories of India, Katherine Ann Jones, thank you for doing that
No,
for us, and
thank
thank
you.
you for sharing your story.
Thank you.